Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining me today. It's Allan Laboucan with the Rocks and Stocks News Show, and have one of our favorite guests on the show, Rob McEwen from McEwen Mining. And thanks a lot for coming on the show again, Rob.
Happy to be on the show again, Allan. Thank you.
You know, Rob, one thing that I really appreciate about the work you do is that you are a big advocate for the industry and things that need to change in the industry and how the industry is being perceived. And you recently did a interview or presentation at the Beaver Creek conference, followed up by just a few days ago, Red Cloud. And both of those were with Frank Dustra, and you really had some great insights. And before we talk about McEwen Mining, I wanted to talk about some of your advocacy work.
All right.
One of the things that stands out to me, and we've talked about before, but I think more people are going to start to realize, is the money printing that's going on and the debt creation. United States, as you mentioned in that Red Cloud thing, is now paying more on servicing their debt than they are in the military. And this is at a time when there's two wars they're trying to fund, and it looks like that could become even more. And yet the debt payments are over $1 trillion annually now. It's pretty mind-boggling, Rob.
And very harmful for the dollar and the lifestyle of all those dependent on the dollar.
Especially those that don't prepare for the reality of what is in front of us.
Well, we'd all like to believe that our governments are working for us, but today it seems that doesn't seem to be the case. They're working for themselves first, and they're disregarding the currency value, the purchasing power. They've imperiled the country's economy by being too populous and distributing lots of money that they haven't been earning. And history is just full of examples. Economic history is full of examples of countries that have gone the other way when their government has been, let's say, too generous.
You know, and I don't really think it's complex economics, Rob. I think it's simple math. If you spend from 2008 till 2022 with near zero interest rates, and then jack them up dramatically, you're going to cause problems. And this $1 trillion, over $1 trillion in debt payments now is a direct sign of what you're building.
Yes, a house of cards.
That is someone starting to pull the cards out, in that, you know, you look at the groups like the BRICS nations, and some believe that that's all about creating an alternative currency to the US dollar. I kind of think it's more about having an alternative to trade with, instead of, you know, getting kind of bullied around by the US dollar. I think that they would like to have some alternative currencies or domestic currencies, or maybe even gold for oil and things like that. You know, gold seems to be more stable when you look at it and priced in various different currencies worldwide. It's doing pretty darn good, and a pretty good store of value, and maybe easier to trade on with your domestic or with your global trade.
I think a lot of countries, the ones that are trying to dislodge the dollar from being the reserve currency of the world, have seen and want the ability of the dollar to be dominant in trade. You're quite right. I'm quite anxious about what's going on in the Middle East right now, and as are a lot of people, but I think you have avowed enemies of America being Iran, North Korea, Russia, China, and they seem to be playing a role in fostering and promoting conflict in the Middle East. And I feel it's an attempt to stretch America's military capabilities to the limits, being
And
active
finances.
in the Ukraine, the Middle East, and you start thinking, well, what does China want? They want to go after Taiwan. Where is the fleet right now? Where is all that money? You look at Russia with the sanctions against it. You look at Iran and North Korea and their vehement statements about taking out America, and you go, I'm very troubled that there's two very large aircraft carriers in the Eastern Med. You have destroyers running up the Red Sea right now, and missile interceptors. And you think, I'm troubled by my thoughts when I look at what's happening many years ago when Nelson just defeated the Spanish Armada. He went in with small ships under the guns of the big galleons, Spanish galleons, when they were the dominant power on the seas, and they destroyed the Spanish Armada. And very recently, the pride of the Russian Navy, a giant battleship, was taken out by missiles coming from the Ukrainian shore. Is this an entrapment that the group said, all right, go in, excite the Hamas to attack Israel? We know what the response is going to be. Given the horrific attack, it's going to be hard. America is the biggest friend of Israel. It comes in with some very large military hardware. And are some of those pieces vulnerable to a missile? You had the warfare is changing. I mean, you see the use of drones dropping explosives and taking out targets, or even the illustration of the Hamas coming in on paragliders below the radar and, being hidden from the surveillance systems. And there's something going on there that you have all this firepower in one place. If they were able to take out, which I pray they never have that ability, one of these vessels, it would make America look like it's vulnerable
Well,
and less
what you're just
powerful in the world relative to the allies it has, and might accelerate. Well, one, I think it would be a threat to the Western world and the lifestyle of the Western world, but it would also start disrupting the currency markets in a big way.
what you're describing there kind of reminds me of that game Risk, where you put
Absolutely.
you put your pieces in certain parts. But what really boggles my mind when you're describing that, Rob, is that it's like the US is playing into that without any look at the bottom line. The bottom line is you're in terrible debt right now, and you can't really be the police officer of the world when you're in that kind of debt. So even if it wasn't for a military strategic purposes, if you looked at it from an economic perspective, what this is really highlighting to me is that more people are probably going to be aware of just the financial difficulties the United States is in.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned the game of Risk. I played many long hours of that game, and you just expose your rear flank or your west or east flank, and someone comes in behind you and takes out where you're least defended.
And you're putting all those assets into one place, and you can't really afford to put it all in that one place or two places, to Ukraine and now in the Middle East. And it looks like exactly what you're saying. It's not just Palestine and Israel, other countries are starting to maybe be troublesome for the US. So it's like they're being put into a game they can't win.
Well, there's a lot of technology and a lot of skills and a lot of power that America has, and uh, everybody is hoping they prevail. But you're right. There's a lot of resources going in there. But I think all of us in the Western world have a lot on the line right now. And I
Absolutely.
don't think the public is recognizing it, or perhaps the youth isn't recognizing it, that their very lifestyle is being imperiled by this action in the Middle East that's spreading like a contagion around the world.
Well, I think that debt problem is a ticking time bomb. I've called it a death spiral of debt. Einstein was famous for saying that compounding interest is the eighth wonder of the world, and those that understand it get paid it, and those that don't pay it. And I think the payment is coming due. And looking at gold and other hard assets, what we eat, what we use to make everything that makes our modern world tick, is going to become more important.
Yes, yes.
Which is a good segue into the other key topic that I wanted to talk about in your advocacy. You made some really interesting points in your Red Cloud presentation, talking about the structural problems that are facing the mining business. One of the key ones I've heard you talk about on this show as well is the perception of mining. Why don't we start there? In your efforts at McEwen Mining, you're making some really significant steps to help change that perception. I'll let you talk about that.
Well, yeah, I believe it's a very necessary change we have to strive to achieve. There is a looming labor shortage in the world of mining, and that's being you're having people at one end, the older end of the employee network is leaving, going into retirement. That's the teachers, that's the knowledge, and the general perception of mining is negative, and that's infected the youth to a point that they believe they don't want to go in there. And there's been a precipitous drop in enrollment in schools of mining engineering and geology and the industries and the education that services the industry. So at the very time, I think of Google's, the head of his Google's circular economy came out about a month and a half ago and said that the world needs more mines. And he said, we don't have enough metals on the surface to recycle in order to reach our objectives of controlling climate. So we need the mines to produce the metals, to produce the technology and the machinery and equipment to help us control climate change. So the very workforce that is going to be in those mines, at least in the Western world, has been declining. So our capabilities of delivering, just because of shortage of people, is being diminished, let alone all the government hurdles and regulations you have to go through. So we have to change that perception so the public starts saying, all right, maybe we do need this, and maybe we better get onto this quickly before we run out of metals. And our lifestyle starts going backwards because we've spent the last 20, 25 years, or the government has, trying to stop mining in the Western world, not in my backyard. And we've got to get out there, and our politicians have to get out there and start speaking in different terms if they want us to continue living the way we live today.
And companies like what McEwen Mining is doing with the mine of the future, I think is a hell of a step in that direction, Rob.
Well, what we've thought is, well, if the labor pool is shrinking, how are you going to attract the best? You're going to have to offer something very different. The accommodation we're looking at on the copper mine we're designing it's a very attractive setting. It has hanging gardens. It produces its own fresh produce. It'll deal with its waste. This mine will be using less than a quarter of the water that a comparable size copper mine would use. It'll be emitting 1/10 of the carbon, and we're going to be reducing that, but we're using 100% renewable energies. The fleets we're looking at is electric, but the accommodation, we're going to put a hotel in the middle so members of the employees' families can come and also people from outside. What we want to do is make a jewel that makes the community proud, the country proud, and all the employees proud of what we're doing there.
I've seen some of the renderings and it's quite incredible. I'd like to take a vacation down there someday, Rob.
Well, once the hotel's open, you're welcome.
Yeah, perfect, perfect. Maybe we could have a conference there.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's very austere countryside, very dry, but you're in these mountains with all sorts of pastel colors cascading down the sides, yellows, pinks, purples, and sand colors.
Growing your own food there and dealing with the waste and how to use the water more effectively. It's a comprehensive plan that's quite incredible. And I honestly don't think that it's as well known as it should be, not just amongst investors, but also amongst the industry. I don't see this kind of stuff happening very often, Rob.
No, we introduced this plan in May in New York at a SME conference. That was the first time we previewed it. And so it's early stages, and you're right, it needs a lot more circulation in the general public. And hopefully it becomes one of the models the industry considers moving forward, just trying to alter that negative public perception of mining.
And I think sometimes the industry gets there has been problems in the past. I don't want to ignore that. But a lot of the problems are not from modern mining methods. It's from, these artisanal miners that are doing things that they really shouldn't be doing that causes the big problems that, and I'm always an advocate of education. I'm First Nations, and I've done some advocacy with companies getting permits. And what I've always felt is important is respect and consultation and inclusion, and doing that in a fashion that educates people about what a mine really is, a modern mine really is. And that's based on sort of the current model, not even considering what McEwen Mining is doing.
Well, what you're seeing, the artisanal workers it's basically what happened historically in North America. They were out in the wilderness working. There was no real oversight or restrictions at the time. Modern mining is governed by all sorts of regulations and is very good at trying to protect the environment, but it's those pictures of historical mining and pictures of what I'll call historical mining going on in present day by the artisanal workers. Right. Still, they're in remote areas until someone comes in with a cell phone.
Exactly. Another topic you brought up is people, Rob, and I've seen the ramifications of the people issue since I got into the business in 1993 when I was in my late 20s. There wasn't too many late 20, 30-year-olds in the business, and I was very fortunate to work with exceptional people as geologists, geophysicists, geochemists that really took me under their wing. One, because I was a sponge for information, But secondly, I don't think they had enough people to talk to that wanted to learn what they had learned in during their career, and we're losing them rapidly. Even not that young a guys. My friend Bob Singh from Great Bear,
Yes.
he had a huge success with Great Bear, and he's retired from the business, and he's only a few years older than me because he's seen how hard it is. This is not an easy business, and really saddens me to a degree because I think we need more Bob Singhs out there in this business.
When I went to the SME conference and presented in New York City, I'd say I'd look out over the audience, and I'd say probably 3/4 of the audience was over 50. You go to the PDAC in Toronto, the large mining convention, I'd say you probably see a number something like that as well. But I was in Vancouver recently at a conference put on by an organization called the Creative Destruction Lab, and it's all about innovation and startups. And there was a session on mining and minerals. And I'd say the composition of the audience was the reverse of what I saw at the SME or the PDAC. And I was really heartened to see that. And there were people from representing all sorts of technologies that are maybe just beginning to be embraced by mining, and some that have yet to be embraced by mining. But very, very pleased to see that, and this group saying, here's an industry that could utilize the talents that they've learned, these students have learned, these young people have learned, and to make the industry more efficient, more lighter impact on the environment, and just it was really great. So I hope to see more of that.
I think you will, Rob, because I think maybe what has caused that is some of those technology people are starting to realize how important mining is to everything. You have nothing, you have no technology without mining, especially copper.
Yes, yes.
And before we get into some more on McEwen, because it's one of my favorite topics, you were also talking about some structural issues inside the industry. One was how important exploration is, of course, but then you were also talking about more M&A being needed, and also more of support of the majors that are gun shy, as you mentioned, to support the exploration industry. And the ramifications of that is where you've been putting some of your money into exploration. Well, I think you've always been pretty active in exploration, but some of those structural issues are quite important as well inside the industry.
Mm-hmm. They are. They're very important. I think with respect to the current market we're in, many of the exploration companies, most of them, have seen their market cap shrink to levels they couldn't have imagined.
Horribly.
And the access to capital has been very constrained, difficult to raise. And these juniors are no longer of a size that are attractive to, or even feasible for institutional investors to step in, because their share prices are so low, and the money they put in, often it's below the threshold of where they can invest. So I believe we're at a time where we are going to see, or should see, consolidation of a number of these smaller players. And it might be 2 companies coming together, 3 companies coming together at a time, just to get a market capitalization large enough that an institutional investor would look at them. And what comes into play is a social issue. And there's usually, in the case of 3 companies together, there are 3 CEOs. And who is the surviving CEO? But if you think of a shrinking labor pool that we talked about earlier on, there's skills that can be utilized when you bring all these companies together. I don't think they're fully staffed even, but there's expertise there. And I gave an example in that talk when I went out, approached Wheaton River and said, let's merge. I had reached a point in my career where I said, I'm going to step away from Goldcorp. I mean, we had 400 million in cash. We had no debt, and we were one of the lowest cost gold producers in the world. And I said, this is probably a good time to step away. I mean, all it could do was go higher, I thought, which it did. But I guess I had grown tired of all the regulations around corporate governance and the hesitation of boards of directors to act boldly. And it's not that I objected to the corporate governance, it was just the application of it that is very onerous, cumbersome, expensive. And, you know, I'll see a prospectus that's 100 pages, that's a short one, but a couple of 100 pages and you go, where does that go? I know where it goes when it comes in the mail. It gets thrown in the garbage can. The only people who benefited are the parasites and the lawyers and the accounting firms and the investment bankers. So they're just taking shareholders' money away.
And you even mentioned that those board guys were more interested in protecting their own ass than they were protecting the shareholders, which they're put in the position to do.
Well, just to be fair to some directors, there are more potential liabilities they can face. They can get locked up in lawsuits. It can damage their reputation. And some of the lawsuits are without basis, but it consumes time, money, and possibly loss or tarnishing of one's reputation.
And even before the Wheaton River and Goldcorp, you talked about how Goldcorp itself was built on merging together a few different companies. So you've done this a couple times in your career.
Yeah, Goldcorp was formed by merging. It was 3 corporate reorganizations where we took 5 companies and compressed it into one over a period of 8 years.
Which was beneficial for all.
Yes, it kept increasing value. And we went from 50 million to 8 billion, and then it kept going after that. So
wow.
It was a very nice run.
So it's coming from the voice of experience, your advice.
Well, limited experience, but experience, yes.
So getting to McEwen Mining, you just had some news out and you did a corporate presentation yesterday that was quite interesting. And some of the takeaways I got from it, going back to this structural issue that you were talking about, you've done a pretty unique thing in that you've got a car maker investing in McEwen Copper, and also a Newton, a division of Rio Tinto, that has some new technology that is also invested a big chunk of money into McEwen Copper. So I think that's the genesis of this idea that we need some interesting funding methods to support what the world needs, in this case, copper at McEwen Copper.
The industry, I think, has been a little narrow in its focus as to where sources of money could be. And as you said, Stellantis, which is the 4th largest car manufacturer in the world, came in, and they were the first car company anywhere in the world to invest directly in a copper deposit. Now they have production in Argentina, where our copper mine is, and they generate pesos down there that they have difficulty getting out of the country whole. So they could buy an interest in a copper project in Argentina, passing pesos through. We pay most of our contracts in pesos. So you don't have to bring money in, have it go through the central bank, get the central bank taking a chunk of it, and then you get a little bit less. Here it goes straight through 100%. They're a large employer in Argentina, and here they have, I think, about over 20,000 employees in Argentina, produce over 160,000 vehicles a year. They need copper because they want to go all electric. So they won't have to import copper, because I don't think anyone in Argentina produces a cathode copper. So they produce concentrate, it has to go offshore
And then back.
and come back as a finished product. We will be producing a cathode copper, which we call green copper, because it doesn't have to travel to the smelter and come back, and it's locally available. And it will also have a very, very low carbon signature. And when we give it to Stellantis, we said we'll be carbon neutral. So they're there, but there's a bigger pool of money out there, and that's in the, let's call it the ESG area. And PricewaterhouseCoopers has estimated there's over $20 trillion earmarked and in the ESG space around the world. So if the mining industry wants to get on the phone or get on a plane, they might want to identify some of these large pools of capital, and they might find, to their surprise, that some of them are receptive to the stories that these mining groups have.
They've probably done their homework, Rob, and they realize how badly we need more copper and other metals to meet the goals of the future, of the now, not just the future of the today.
We've gone and talked to a number of automobile manufacturers, and one thing that really surprised me was came back that Volkswagen had 16 geologists on staff. And you go, wait a minute, they're a car manufacturer. What are they doing with geologists on staff? But that's just to looking for sources of material that they need to build their vehicles.
And, you know, and something else you brought up there is there's been a lot of effort in the last few decades for offshoring, sending manufacturing all over the world. And because of these various different issues of currencies and trading and moving stuff, onshoring is becoming, I think, going to be a more and more important thing. And you've got to go where the metals are. And in your case, you've got a lot of those metals in McEwen copper that are very much needed, and quite an exceptional project when you look at undeveloped projects throughout the world of copper. We need more of the McEwen coppers, and we don't have enough of them. And you stack up very favorably compared to them in grade, size, and in cost of producing that.
Yes. We're considered the 8th largest undeveloped copper deposit in the world. And only 3 of those 8 are not owned by majors. So we're in a very small, rarefied group. Our cost,
and in the lowest quartile of costs.
That's correct. That's correct.
That harkens back to the Goldcorp days for me, because Goldcorp seemed to really understand the importance of margin, free cash flow, building up cash, and that's how you do it.
Exactly. I mean, what we have in the copper, I like. It's long life, it's low cost, it's good grade. Everything you want in a mine. That's what I'm trying to get into our precious metals. We're quite a distance from that at the moment, but it's improving.
It's improving, and what I really took out of the latest quarterly report is just how much money you're putting back into exploration. And really, that was the turning point for Goldcorp. It had been a mining company for mining for a long time and marginal. And then you got in a little deeper and you started hitting those jewelry boxes. And some of the work you've recently reported on, I think we talked about it last show, is your underground workings are starting to find some stuff, as well as the truth machine. And that really excites me, because I think you're in ground there that you could have some Goldcorp surprises at depth.
Yeah, well, when I bought into the mine that became the star of Goldcorp, it had a long history of difficult labor relations. It was high cost. It was viewed as being very short life. A lot of people thought it was soon to close. And my CFO and I decided, well, it had some debt when we bought it. So we retired the debt. And then let's put some money into exploration. We said to our exploration department, here's $10 million. And they didn't have a budget at all. I said, go spend it. And on some of your targets. And that was in December 95. And March of 96, they came back and said, well, we've got some results you might like. I said, like what? And they said, we have 9 drill holes. The average grade is 9 ounces per ton. The average width is 8 feet. This was located a mile below surface. It was sitting well out in the hanging wall, or well away from all of our infrastructure. And I said to them, well, that's pretty good. And I said, spend that money. If you keep finding that, I'll give you another 10. And they got another 10 and another 10.
The rest is history. But I don't think a lot of people, I'm such a junkie for exploration, Rob, and I know where you are and in the kind of rocks you are, and the similarities between the Goldcorp mine and I don't think enough is understood about the potential for having some pleasant surprises with the truth machine on the ground that you're working on.
Mm-hmm.
So I was really happy to see all that mention of the money you're putting back into exploration.
No, as you said, it was exploration that created the fabulous story at Goldcorp. And since then, I guess I've always been looking for stories that might give a large return. And Mother Nature, there's a cornucopia sitting just below the surface. It's just a question.
Well, the big thing that I think sometimes people lose sight of, Rob, is that what created what is near surface, it comes from deeper. And
yes.
As you get, and it's a heat engine that creates that mineralization. And sometimes you got to go chasing that heat engine to find the jewelry boxes of mines underneath.
Exactly. And I mean, there was a lot of movement after it was put in there. A lot of faulting and movement of the rock. So yes, it's good. Sorry, someone just walked by that wanted my attention.
No worries, Rob. I tried to talk a little there. I caught the message. But yeah, I'm really impressed with the potential for exploration success, and I'm really glad to see you're putting so much of that into your gold and your copper operations. You're doing a lot of work with the truth machine in copper as well.
Yes. Yep. Nope, and with your help, just pointing me in directions of interest.
Thank you very much for that kind words, Rob. I'm going to close it off. As usual, thank you very much for your insights. I think it's greatly helpful to my audience and myself, to be honest.
Well, thank you for your continuing interest. And,
awesome. Let me close it off, Rob. So there you go, folks. Rob had some great insights into the things that need to happen for the perception of mining industry-wide and what he's doing at McEwen Mining. And right now, McEwen Copper is getting a lot of attention. When you get investments from the fourth largest car maker in the world, and you get investments from Rio Tinto, and with a new proprietary technology for extraction and getting more out of it faster, that has a way of catching attention. I do believe that what is not catching enough attention is the money that McEwen Mining is putting back into their gold operations to look around in their deposits and below and around their deposits. And, they're in some pretty great ground that could lead to some spectacular stuff. So I was glad today to be able to talk about all those topics. And as usual, my shows are not for information purposes only. I'm not making buying or selling recommendations. You need to talk to your financial advisor to assess your risk profile. I do my homework, and I've spent 30 years doing this homework, and they pass my smell test, but you need to do that homework as well. And I think if you do, you'll find that McEwen Mining has great things to offer on the gold space, as well as in the copper space. And I invite you to do that homework. On that note, have a great day. Again, Rob, thank you very much for spending time with us.
Thanks, Allan. Be well.
You too.